Welcome to Crossing Phase, the first podcast featuring a Christian and a Muslim talking religion and politics. My name is Matt Hawkins. I'm a former policy director for the Southern Baptist Convention, and my friend John Pinna joins me. He's a former director of government and international relations of the American Islamic Congress. This Crossing Phase podcast is a partnership between Rolltop Productions and Muslims for Muslims. John Pinna, welcome to our first video edition of Crossing Phase.
I know. I had to get the pictures up behind me so the wall wasn't blank. You know, that was one's held with a thumbtack, one's got tape, the other one's got a nail. Pulling out stuff from the different walls. But
thanks for the effort to try to make your background a little more interesting.
My apartment in DC, I had this wonderful corner. It was
Right.
the perfect corner, and I had my all my stuff from Nuristan I had these wonderful wood bowls from Nuristan that I brought back from Afghanistan, and I had these great pictures of some kind of bazaar or something. It was really cool. So anytime anybody was talking to me, I'd have it. And then I haven't done anything really super digital, and so I was like, okay, let me hang up the pictures. So that's my deal, So and then we have you have the mysterious curtain behind you. I feel like anybody's going to pop out at any moment. Maybe do a little flamenco dancing.
I have to close the curtains because at this time of day, the sun just kind of washes out my entire background or even me. So I draw the curtains. Otherwise, I really prefer the natural light.
I just imagine cornfields as far as the eye can see from your window. Right? The Tennessee.
It's not so much cornfields. It's kind of rolling green Tennessee plains and trees or rolling hills. But we also have a guest today on our first video edition of Crossing Phase. His name is Senge Searing. He is the leader of Gilgit-Baltistan Institute, which we'll hear more about briefly. But John, you invited Senge on as a subject matter expert to explain some things to us. What prompted you to invite Senge on this week?
So I was sort of blessed to work with Mustafa Akol, the author of was blessed to work. Are we going to edit this? Can we edit that? I don't know.
No editing. It's video.
All right. So I was blessed to work with Mustafa Akol, who's the author of Islamic Jesus, who on a online campaign about the Hagia Sophia. And we were advocating that it doesn't become a mosque. And so the challenge was we were talking about this issue, and the Muslim community started hitting us on Kashmir. And I admittedly am not a subject matter on Kashmir. I know enough to be dangerous. I've been around that region, but I can't speak to the issues. So I promised our listeners that we would have a subject matter on board. And Senge is the president of the Institute for Gilgit-Baltistan Studies, who is a longstanding friend and colleague, and I know he knows the issues, and I felt compelled to have someone who is from the region speak about it first, and so that was why I called him on board, and that's the nexus of how we started this conversation.
Welcome, Senge, to Crossing Phase.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. It's an honor. I just realized that this is the first video webinar, podcast that you're doing, so I feel really special being the first guest, so thank you so much.
No, it's our pleasure to have you.
And you should also feel honored and welcome because John decided to have an actual expert on instead of just winging it for himself, which he generally does here on the show.
Yeah, who knows? Just most people don't know about Kashmir, so I guess I could just say whatever I want, right? So and I already made the faux pas. We're not going to edit this, so I already implemented the Turkish flaw, which that's anytime there's ever a presentation and something goes wrong.
I have a lot of respect for John. He's a person of knowledge, and he has hosted His Holiness Dalai Lama several times, and other important people from that region, and he has vast knowledge about different faiths, and so I think if he wants to speak on behalf of Kashmir or Gilgit, I'll be okay with that.
I appreciate that nod. I'd be scared to do so at this point because I'm sitting in the shadow of your knowledge, your experience, and really your homeland. And so it's a wonderfully vast place, dreamy. If anyone Googles Kashmir and goes past the conflict components and just goes to the landscape, it's Shangri-La. Can I say that? And
Yes, yes, that's one of the words. Yes,
yeah, which
yeah,
is, paradise in the mountains, paradise in the
yes.
clouds. Um, but I think it'd be nice to start off with, a little bit of who you are and why this issue is so important to you. We mentioned that you're from the region, but what's the driving force of how you came to be advocating for the peoples of this region, and in particular Kashmir?
So yeah, I come from the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and before partition, there used to be a district in Jammu and Kashmir called Ladakh. That's where I come from. So in 1947, when partition happened, half of Ladakh came in Pakistan's occupation. So there's a valley in that part called Shigar, where I was born, and the second tallest mountain in the world, K2, is located in Shigar. So that's how most of the people in the West know about Shigar, through Mount Godwin, Austin. And I have worked on cultural issues for a long time. I think I got introduced to our connection with the Tibetan world when I was studying in a Pakistani city called Lahore. And I was very fortunate that I was able to go and access this database and some books and other information about our linguistic relationship with Tibet. And I was one of probably the first 3 or 4 people from Gilgit-Baltistan who was able to learn to write Tibetan script, which is our indigenous script. So that part of Jammu and Kashmir up north, it is an extension of the Tibetan plateau. We are on the extreme western side, and my district would be the last district where Tibetan language is spoken. So I think we bring a lot of this richness to the culture of Jammu and Kashmir, with a lot of diversity in language and culture and religion. And then I learned about how Tibetans are very active in the United States, and there are a lot of help they're getting. And when I came here, I got involved again, and I started a nonprofit organization talking about these issues. And John, a lot of the work that you have supported me on those issues, and we have done a lot of work together. So I mean,
The
yeah,
Kampa people are a client of mine.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
when they came
We're
to
all,
DC,
yeah, we're all
we
related,
represent.
and
Yeah.
I know John comes from Afghanistan, his ancestry, and 2 of our districts in Gilgit-Baltistan border the Badakhshan province of Afghanistan. So we are immediate neighbors. So there's an overlap of culture, the Tajik Afghan culture in the north of Gilgit-Baltistan and the east of Afghanistan and Tajikistan. We share a lot of these interesting historical richness. I started my education in Pakistan. I was an engineer. Then I went to England. I did masters in development studies. Was getting inclined towards learning more about local anthropology, cultures, economic and socio-cultural issues, and that's how I started learning about our relationship with Jammu and Kashmir, with Tibet, and other issues. I've done a lot of cultural work in Gilgit-Baltistan. Actually, I started this non-profit where we were getting help from Tibetan organization from Australia. They were giving us money to put up signboards and in Tibetan script, in local script, on different shops. It was a small project, but it had huge significance because the tourists who come to Gilgit-Baltistan is a very touristy place. The world's highest mountains, out of I think the first 50 mountains, I think more than 30 of them, they are in Gilgit-Baltistan. We have the longest glaciers outside the polar region that are in Gilgit-Baltistan.
And
Hundreds of lakes.
pink salt.
And pink salt, the Himalayan salt, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And there's the jewels, tourmaline, and all those
The
semi-precious jewels.
turquoises,
Yeah,
yeah.
are all over.
The
They're litter the
rubies and
mountains.
turquoises,
You
yeah.
could
So
just pull
it's a
them.
land of precious stones,
Yeah.
so a lot of people who come there, they would see this as an extension of some Pashtun or Afghan land, because there was not much that they could relate us to Tibetans. So when they start seeing these signboards, and they could recall that they have seen the same thing in Nepal or in Tibet or in Ladakh. So they were able to make that connection, our cultural connection, on their own just by looking at those signboards. So we put a lot of signboards there, and we started working with the school kids, helping with their primary education in local scripts. So I've been able to stay in touch with those people who still working on it. There are some private, NGOs there. They have local schools, and so that's how I started. Working with cultural identity of our land. Not much much in politics, but mostly like how are we related to the Indians, to the Tibetans, to the Central Asians. How did we end up in Pakistan? Then came Kashmir, and the whole conflict of Kashmir, and the religion and division of India based on religion and all that. So I think that's how I started as a cultural activist, and worked in that sector for a long time. I was on the board. I was a member of the board of directors of Baltistan Cultural Foundation. So Baltistan Cultural Foundation was getting a lot of money from Aga Khan Foundation, and Aga Khan Foundation. They have an office in Washington D.C. They have offices in several countries in Europe, and it's a huge institution.
The Aga Khan
network, yeah.
All the hospitals, all the education institutions in Pakistan and developing countries. 110 countries is the Aga Khan network.
Yeah, exactly. They've done a lot of work in Chicago with microfinancing and other. So I think they have a huge name. They got a lot of money from USAID, from DFID Britain, from ODA, from NORAD in Norway, Netherlands. Literally every country has tried to put, because they carry a lot of credibility, right? So they gave us a lot of money on working on cultural, projects, and one of them was working on languages. So we tried to do that for a long time. And when I came here, I got more, involved on the political spectrum, on the side of how we're related to Kashmir, and all these dynamics of how the Kashmir issue has remained stagnant, and it has affected our local identities. And our cultures and economies, obviously, and how it has impacted an overall region. Because a lot of people that you talk to, they will tell you that Kashmir is one of the flashpoints after Palestine, right? So
it's a disputed territory.
It is. Yeah.
I mean, it's, and just to be clear, so Jammu and Kashmir it was two names. We know Kashmir. The Jammu part was the northern areas, right?
Yeah, so when Jammu Kashmir was a state, when the British were ruling India, they had two states within that one princely state, just like we have, let's say
it was a Hindu kingdom. Wasn't it?
Let's say we have two neighboring states of, let's say, Maryland and Pennsylvania. So they had two states. One was Jammu, one was Kashmir.
Okay.
These two were coupled together. So my district, Ladakh, was part of the Jammu province.
Okay.
Right? And Kashmir province controlled Gilgit.
Okay.
And after partition, then in 1970s, there was a Pakistani Prime Minister, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He rearranged the administration a little bit, and he put Gilgit and Baltistan together in one unit. So that's how it is called Gilgit-Baltistan now, but previously Baltistan was a small county within the Ladakh district.
Okay.
And it didn't have its own name or its own identity the way it is today after partition. And so yeah, I mean, we had this Dogra. Dogra means it's a ethnic tribe. These people that live in the south of Jammu and Kashmir. And he was a military officer within the larger Punjab state. One of the greatest kings of India, Ranjit Singh. I don't know if you've heard about him. He's a big name. He's, let's say, he's the only person known in Indian history who were able to defeat the Afghans. So he is a big name.
Well, you're talking about the Sikh Empire
the Sikh Empire, yes,
went all the way to China.
Yes.
And then I think it was the Tibetans and the Chinese that conspired and came out of the mountains to defeat him.
And Mongols.
When he was on Hajj or something. He was on a pilgrimage. I don't know. This is from what I remember from history.
So we were part of the Sikh Empire.
Yeah.
And then what happened is that,
that was post-Muslim. That was the post-Mughal period, right?
No, it's recent, like during the British.
Ah,
So the British came and they defeated Ranjit Singh,
right. That's what.
his empire, and he was declining. So as part of an arrangement with Jammu and Kashmir, because at that time the Russians were, threatening.
Yeah,
So British wanted a buffer
yeah, the great
between,
game.
between their own empire and the Russians. So they talked to the Dogras, who was an aspiring, very well-known general at that time, Gulab Singh. And Gulab Singh created this state as a buffer by giving some money to the British. By that time, the British has taken over Punjab. There was no Sikh kingdom anymore. They had taken over Punjab, they had taken over Calcutta, Bengal, they have taken a lot of Indian land by then. So they allowed him to have a buffer and, work with him. Sovereignty obviously was with the British,
Right.
but he was able to have an
It was a
internal
British
control.
principality, or
Yeah, so that's how
ruled
he
by a
was able to
viceroy.
he was able to create Jammu and Kashmir state, a
Okay.
princely state within the British Kingdom empire at that time. Yeah, so it was a state controlled by the Dogras, and in 1842 and 1846, they were able to take over most of Gilgit-Baltistan and Ladakh and some parts of Tibet, and they were able to extend it all the way to Xinjiang and the border of Tajikistan. So that's how this state was created.
So we're the crossing faiths. Our podcast is faith and politics. So maybe we can get a little bit into
Yeah.
the multi-faith matrix of the region, because what I understand and from the history that I know is that there was a lot of cooperation all the way up to relatively recent period of time. Even though there was incursions by different invasions, because the Crossroads of Empires applies to this region,
Yeah.
there was a tremendous amount of. I mean, I was just talking to one of the Sufi leaders, Baba Mundi, who was chatting about how the Sufis brought Islamic multi-faith cooperation to the region, and I know that there's a what's the cuisine? There's a cuisine. There's a dish that all the faith groups agree is edible, whether you're halal or this one or that one or whatever. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The staple diet, the local roasted barley that probably everyone eats, and the Tibetan tea, probably the pink tea
Yeah.
with the pink salt that we
Kashmiri
have.
chai.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
you need to have someone making it all day.
Yeah.
Like an old lady needs to be churning
Matthew,
it.
we put salt in our tea, butter and salt. I don't know if you know
Interesting.
about that. Yeah.
No, I don't.
So when Amber, my wife, she went to, she tried it when we were there, and she like, I'm not gonna drink this soup anymore. This is not tea. This is soup. So
It's like
it
you
gets
can cut
really
it.
thick.
You
Yeah.
can cut it. I love Kashmiri chai. If someone says Kashmiri chai, you're there. We'll put the link. It's pink tea.
Yeah.
And the leaves, you have to have a lady. I don't say a lady, but you have to have
They have to cook
nani.
it for hours. They have to
Yeah,
cook it
just
for
sit there.
hours.
A
Yeah.
grandma just
Yeah.
will just keep, and because otherwise
It's
it
her-
curdles. So she has to keep mixing it and mixing
Yeah.
it. I remember Nani
A lot of
doing that
turning,
all day
yeah.
long. Yeah.
Interesting.
So
I think it's Kashmir is a very interesting topic for your platform, because despite the fact that I come from a Muslim background, my historical connections with Tibet and the Sufis and the rishis of Kashmir, it allow us to have respect and acceptance of pre-Islamic traditions, right? So we have respect for all of them. Like, we have so many rituals that are non-Islamic. We have belief in the local deities and all these different characteristics of shaman and bone traditions that exist today. We will sing to the local gods, for instance, when it is time for harvest, or when it is time to take the yaks to the pastures, or when it's time to repair our irrigation system to bring water from the glaciers to the fields and stuff after sowing. So I think this coexistence of the different faiths in Kashmir is I think it's a glaring example of how, like, communities could live together, have respect for, all different religions. Like you said, Islam's Jesus, right? Jesus is a common icon for Muslims and Christians and other faiths. So I think we also have, like, this commonality in Kashmir, and I think it's very interesting.
Well, there's a fable about Yaz
Yeah,
Yusuf, that Jesus is
yeah,
in the
yes,
Kashmir. There's
yes,
two Hebrew graves there,
yes,
and
yes.
one's for Mariam, and the other one is Yaz Yusuf, the
Yeah,
son of Joseph.
and Ahmadi Muslims, one of the sects in Islam, you know that, we have shared seat with them at the round table, a lot of Ahmadis, because they're persecuted in Pakistan. They go to Kashmir and they go to those tombs,
Yeah.
and they think, Jesus was buried there, and they pray to those tombs, and they still exist, and there's a lot of reverence around it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and we on a previous episode of Crossing Phase, I'll link in the show notes. We had a friend named John Prabhudas who talked about a lot of the Christian history in the country and region of India. So you can get some further background on how early Christianity.
Thomas.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Tom.
Yeah, legend has it. Thomas brought the
I
gospel
will
to the
probably
Indian
need
region.
John's help there a little bit about Christianity, but I know that the Moravians, is that the name?
Moravians.
Is it the German,
Yeah.
subgroup that they arrived in Ladakh, for instance, where I come from, and they were able to, like, establish their setup in Leh, which was our capital at that time, and there are like 200 or 300 Christians that still live there. And as we were talking about this, like, coexistence, right? So they have Tibetan names, and they're all Christians, just like, I'm a Muslim and I have a Tibetan name. So I think, when you come to Ladakh and these, like, a lot of people think that we really do not have to carry Arabic names to identify ourselves, or Roman names to identify ourselves as Christians. So, they have Tibetan names, and there are a lot of Christians who live there, and they contribute, very positively to the local culture and society. So.
I get slammed all the time. I got just slammed 2 weeks ago by a guy who goes, your name is John. He goes, are you really Muslim? And I go, well, you can call me Yahya if that makes you feel any better, but you call yourself John, or you can call yourself, Joe, or whatever you want, and still be Muslim.
Yeah.
So it's just funny how people.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I wear this Tibetan dress, and the question they ask is, "Are you a Buddhist?" As if, like, So I think I totally understand where you're coming from our, the way we dress or the way we carry our names, and people try to, like, box us up, right? And compartmentalize us. But the fact remains that I think these are conversion points when it comes to Badakhshan, where you come from. When we come to, like, southern Xinjiang, like Kashgar and Yarkand and Khotan, these were on the Silk Route, right? Yeah. Gilgit and Ladakh was on the Silk Route. Ladakh was one of the most important staging posts on the Silk Route. And people from Europe and China and Mongolia and, Arabia, they all came together. They used to travel, from east and west in that direction. And I think, a lot of beautiful blends were created during those times.
So I'm glad, Senge, that you brought up your shirt collar, because I was going to ask about that. Particularly in the context of us discussing the diversity of the region you come from. John and I threw on collared shirts, I think, just because we happen to be on video today and want to be somewhat presentable.
Well, I don't have I love my cultural clothes, but I would wear them all the time, but I don't have a lot here in the apartment. I have to go to my mom.
Today, John is a New Yorker, so he's just wearing New York. So.
Yeah, so I'm doing that. But think about this.
You got the head covering on.
Yeah, I got the dopey.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Imagine this from a multi-faith perspective. We've got a Southern Baptist in Tennessee. From you're from Virginia, from West Virginia, right?
West Virginia, get it straight, man.
From West Virginia. So, and we have a Tibetan Muslim from really Kashmir, but from Gilgit-Baltistan, sitting there, and then we have a Greek,
An
a
American
Greek.
Greek
Yeah,
of
I'm,
God.
I was born in America, but I'm an
Yeah.
Indo-Greek. I'm from the age of Hellenism
With a
in,
bit of Egypt and Sicily, right?
well, all both. My mother is a
Yeah,
Greek from North Africa,
yeah,
so it's all Greek. She's a Ptolemaic Greek, and so we both converged through Italy and then came here to
yeah,
America.
yeah,
So it's from a faith background and a cultural background. It's amazing.
yeah.
And so, but so
Matt was asking about the shirt. You know, Matt, we are one of the Tibetan groups. We used to be part of the Tibetan larger kingdom. There used to
Okay.
be several kingdoms, but the two famous one were the Yarlung kingdom, which supported the Dalai Lamas, and then we had the Shanshung kingdom, and eventually there was a fight, and then we got separated, and then the Dogras took control of Gilgit-Baltistan and Ladakh and Western Tibet, and then we did not have any administrative link with Tibet, but culturally we are Tibetan, and as John would tell you, there are more than 200 Tibetan dialects in the world today. And Balti is one of the most ancient, the archaic dialect that has survived.
Wow.
And yeah, it's like Old English from the 17th or 16th or 18th century, and we are really proud of that identity. And there's so many times that within the last 60, 70 years that there have been attacks on our identity, and we have been like labeled as non-Muslim. We have been wooed to move further towards Middle East and away from our identity. But I tell you, even though we do not have any physical link with the Tibetans, but we have, stood firm, and we have told Pakistani government that this is our identity and we're not going to abandon that. So nowadays, I don't know if John knows about that. We have a local swastika sign which is called Yundrung, Tibetan Yundrung. It is you will find them in all the mosques, Muslim mosque, Tibetan swastika sign, and you will find them on like old palaces and different buildings. And right now, I mean, in the last 2 3 months, what is going on is that Pakistan has established a non-affiliated university in Baltistan, and the vice chancellor, he's from Pakistan, and he's trying to tell local people that this Tibetan Yundrung that you have, which comes all the way from the Bon culture, like thousands of years before, and it is very different from the German cross that a lot of Americans probably would misunderstood, probably misjudge us, and not see that in that context.
Right.
He was trying to tell us that this is actually a Christian cross. There is no existence of Tibetan Yundrung here, and then the youth, kids who were born in the 80s and 90s, they stood up, who have no recollection of like what was Tibet and how we were connected with Tibet, and they told this guy, the vice chancellor, that no, this is our identity. You cannot try to rewrite something for us. This is not a Christian cross, and this is a Tibetan Yundrung. We are connected with that culture, and we're really proud of that. So I think even as we keep coming back to the same this topic, is that how the cultures have crossed and how the faiths have crossed, and we have been able to carry all of them simultaneously, and be proud of that. I think that is something really beautiful that in many parts of Middle East, it doesn't exist. There's a very this tunnel vision in some parts of Arab countries where they have tried to abandon their pre-Islamic heritage and try to hide it, and try to disconnect from that. So I think this is something that what people from Badakhshan, John himself or myself, we've been able to proudly sport.
And we're out there at sometimes, because I know that we end up being called out by our respective communities. But the fact is that we're the cultural richness, and a lot of people say this. Even a lot of Muslims that I've talked to when I'm overseas, I spent 20 years doing the development work. They'll say, "Oh, well, in Iraq, we didn't care what faith you were. We would sit." I just came back from Erbil, and there's still a lot of multi-faith cooperation in Erbil. I was shocked. I've always spent time in southern Iraq, and largely with the Shia community. So it's been
Kurdistan.
But up north, in Erbil, which is one of the oldest inhabited places on the planet, the Zoroastrians, the Yazidis, the Christians, on all the different Muslims, the pantheon of Muslim groups there, are all still cooperating and talking and interacting. It's the only governmental agency, so the Kurdish Ministry of Religion, it's the only ministry on the planet that each religion has their own office in the ministry. And they always say, well, we never, when it was a Jewish holiday, we would celebrate the Jewish holidays. When it was Christian, we'd celebrate no one really did anything. There was not a lot of separation. And then they say, well, and then extremism came into the region, and we had to deal with that. And I think this is part of, if I'm going to talk about Kashmir, and I'll put it in a nutshell, we have two countries formed that are post-British rule. Mm-hmm. So Pakistan was formed, and with the expulsion of the Muslims, large groups of Muslims from India into Pakistan during the partition. And then you have this...
Well, majority of the Muslims stayed back. The minority, they moved to the new Pakistan. So even after that exchange of Hindus were expelled from modern-day Pakistan, and Muslims were able to, to resettle in Karachi and other places, that population was a minuscule portion of the total Muslim population. So the majority of the Muslims decided to stay back.
There's still 200 million Muslims in
200
India,
million here, and almost 160, 170 in Bangladesh, and about 200 million in India.
So I appreciate that correction. And so we have these two countries. One is a formation of New and the partition, and then this region that was given to India. And then almost immediately at that time, the Pakistanis invaded, right, and occupied the.
So let me go a little bit into history. So it was a British part of the British Empire, and the British came up with a constitutional arrangement to divide the country, because they thought that Muslim might not be able to, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he wanted his own country, and so they came up with the constitutional arrangement. And within that constitutional arrangement, they divided the lands controlled from New Delhi, Delhi at that time, under the Viceroy of India, into three portions. The first portion was called British Allies. They were given independence a year or two before the rest of India was divided. So today you have all these Gulf states. They were controlled from Delhi at that time. Qatar and Bahrain and Arab Emirates and Oman and all these states. Then Myanmar was controlled from Delhi. It was given independence, right? Mm-hmm. Sri Lanka was separated. Mauritius was separated, for instance. That is one layer of separation, division of India that happened. Then we come to the rest of the two parts. One was called the British India. And British India was treated just like England, the Queen was treating Scotland or Ireland, for instance. And then the third part was called the princely states. There were about 65 princely states. They had local autonomy. They were, British had control over the foreign affairs and military, and internal autonomy was given to the locals. So British came with this constitutional arrangement to divide, and it was promulgated on 18th of July 1947 when Queen signed it. And according to that, if a ruler of any princely state by his or her own will decide to merge with India or Pakistan, and if Queen accepted that, that would be the final decision of that, right? Now, Jammu and Kashmir ruler, he was having second thoughts about merging with any country. India was telling, because at that time, I don't know if you know about another state called Hyderabad. Hyderabad was a much bigger state. It was in the middle of India with no land connection with Pakistan. It was one of the richest states of India. and it was 90% Hindu, but ruled by a Muslim king, right? And Indian rulers were talking about, Hyderabad might not come with India, so let's try to do a swap with Kashmir and Hyderabad. This is what was going on in their mind at that time. So the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, he was not very clear about which direction he was going to go. And then on October the 22nd of 1947, Pakistan attacked Kashmir. And they started raping local women. They started, taking local lands. And they were very close to reaching the capital of Jammu and Kashmir called Srinagar. So this ruler, he goes to Lord Mountbatten, who is representing, Queen. And Lord Mountbatten sends him to Nehru, the Prime Minister of India. And he says, I need your military to help me because Pakistan has attacked me. And Nehru says, by constitutional arrangement, you have to align with one of us. You haven't made up your mind.
Right.
I'm okay if you want to go with Pakistan, you want to come with India, that's fine, but you have to have a legal relationship with us in order to have our military support you. Now, according to the books, Pakistani military and the tribal Lashkar were only a few miles away from Srinagar when this was happening. So this guy leaves and he takes another 24 hours to think about it. He comes back, he gives the letter of accession. And he said, okay, now there's a very clear sense of I'm going to get occupied. They're literally a few miles away, and we can hear the shelling and the artillery. So the letter of accession goes to Lord Mountbatten, goes to, he represents the Queen. It gets signed, and then India sends its troops. The war happens, and then the ceasefire happened because the United Nations get involved. Nehru goes to United Nations. And Nehru says, I have the letter of accession. Pakistan has attacked my land. The ruler wants me to help him, and Pakistan should withdraw. So this is how the ceasefire happened, and since then we haven't had a chance to solve it.
And there's been 4 Indo-Pakistani wars since then.
Yeah, three wars in Kashmir out of 4.
Right.
Since then, and it's a huge impasse. So just thought bring a little history in here. Yeah. Of how the things evolved and how we're stuck with not getting it solved.
So, given that backstory, Senge, kind of want to zoom out again for the sake of
American audience,
Westerner and an American audience, right? So we're as a reminder, we're talking about a region that's north of India or northern India, depending upon your politics, and it's kind of northeast of Pakistan. It's not adjacent to Afghanistan, but it's east of Afghanistan, and then it's right along the western border of China, literally the other side of the world from us.
Yes.
What might prompt me as an American to follow what's going on in Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan?
So first of all, I would say that this is a dispute that's going on for the last 70 years between 2 nuclear powers, right? India and Pakistan. Right. They became nuclear powers in the 70s and the 80s. But even before that, if you look at Gilgit-Baltistan, I mean, John knows because he's from Badakhshan, the British and the Chinese and the Tibetans, all these empires fought over it. The Russians fought over it. China and Tibetans had 2 huge wars in Gilgit. And both times, the Tibetans defeated the Chinese and pushed them back. So we used to be a battleground, for the time immemorial, and now it's coming back where we have 2 nuclear powers, and now you add China into it, because in the last few months we have seen that China has become very active after reorganization. India did a constitutional amendment, and they tried to give Ladakh its own identity because Ladakhis were not happy within Kashmir context. They wanted their own identity, their own province. So now they have their own province. And that province has a Tibetan characteristic, which is right on the border of Tibet, and that is really threatening, China, because China is occupying Tibet. And there's a lot of Buddhist religious freedom in Ladakh, that the Tibetans do not enjoy in Tibet. So I think China is getting, anxious about that. So now China has jumped into the situation. They have occupied some parts of Ladakh close to Xinjiang. Like for instance, they tried to encroach on Galvan Valley. This is one of the famous valleys that came into in American media in the last about 2-3 months after we had the pandemic shut down. So China has jumped in. India and China are emerging as the new growing powers of Asia, the growing economies of Asia. China is threatening United States with its multifaceted expansions, whether it's economic, whether it's in context of space technology and expansion, whether it's political, whether it's rearrangement of allies in Asia. And that threat that the United States see is, and also India see, they are, bringing India and the United States as well as Japan, Vietnam, and Australia closer. There's a quad that has been formed. So the people of the United States, I think, in the context of what has happened after China virus, Wuhan virus, and how China has been able to paralyze the whole world with with this situation, and the closure of Chinese consulate in Houston, for instance, our consulate in Chengdu in Sichuan province. I think the Cold War, it's the Cold War 2.0 is very much in place, and I think India plays a huge role in it. We need India as a partner. So I think that is what probably will have American people look at the situation in that context, because Kashmir is definitely one of the sticking points, one of these bones of contention that China, Pakistan, and India are all fighting over. And Pakistan and China have aligned when it comes to situation in Kashmir, and they're also threatening Afghanistan. There are a lot of Taliban attacks that we see right now. They are trying to bring Iran on their side in CPAC. So I think this, in my opinion, this in the broader context has to do with how to control American influence in that region. Not just attack India, not just grab a piece of land from Kashmir, but how to counter United States. And Iran and China both are very much interested in that, and Kashmir is right in the middle of it. So I think that is something that American people would be interested in.
And go ahead, John.
We went into hardcore politics, John.
Well, on a moral
we moved away from religion, and we're back into.
Well, we're going to get back in religion in a second, because I'm going to be there. On a moral ground, I mean, we have a local population that's caught between two superpowers or two nuclear powers.
Yes.
And then you also have the China and Russia influence in Pakistan dealing with this, right? And they're vying with both India and Pakistan back and forth.
Yes.
You have a local population that's diversely religious, and religious freedom, international religious freedom, is enshrined in the NSS, National Security Strategy. I was part of drafting that, and part of our founding principles of our country, and the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998.
Yes.
Just from a moral standing, we have a local population that's diverse, religiously, ethnically, culturally, that's struggling for representation. There was supposed to be a vote some time ago. This is like maybe 50 years ago or whatever, on their independence, right? And it never took place, right? That vote never took place. I vaguely remember a conversation about that in my history lessons. So you have this local population struggling. You have China encroachment in that region, and it diminishes U.S. influence. But there's also something really sexy there, and that's rare minerals that's used in development of space technology and high technology that is used in weapon development, and medical innovation, right? So there's that whole business there, and Afghanistan and both Kashmir both have those minerals, and it's the richest place in the world for those minerals.
We have our trucks, trucks full of dark gray, sand-like, minerals going to Xinjiang every day from Gilgit. And when the local people ask the Chinese, like, why are you, they ask, like, what is this? And they're like, this is just sand, nothing important, just sand. It's like,
but there's stuff
why are you transporting sand from Gilgit to like 800 miles away. Like, are you short of sand? There's a huge Gobi Desert in China. You can get sand from there. So you're right. All the heavy metals that Gilgit-Baltistan has, and now, they have a rail link to Afghanistan. I don't know if you know or not, but China through Xinjiang and Kazakhstan have brought rail line all the way to the Persian port of Bandar Abbas. And they have rail service from Iran and Afghanistan's border through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan into Xinjiang, and they are taking all the rare metals that back to China. And I think that is one thing, that China is looking for, competing with the U.S. in space technology. So
yeah, I mean, so that's a big deal, And then we have this other element, which is the Tibetan struggle, and
yes.
tied to the Tibetan struggle, which we're obviously the Dalai Lama and the government in exile, in that place. And Tibet has been occupied since 1949.
Yeah.
But it also touches on the Uyghur issue, because the Uyghurs are neighbors in that region, which Secretary Pompeo has been very vocal about.
Yes.
We have now a USURF commissioner that is Uyghur.
My full respect to our, Secretary Pompeo. I think he's one of the best so far. I don't know if you read this resolution that they passed in the United Nations. Most of the Muslim countries were on it, including Pakistan. And it was very sad. We talked about morality, right? Iran and Pakistan signed it, saying that China is not oppressing Uyghurs. They're very happy there. I can send a copy of that to you. And China's, a great friend of ours, and the imperialist USA, he has it has its own agenda, and China is a friend of Muslims. So it is, when it comes to politics, countries like Pakistan, Iran, they're totally trying to hide this fact. There's a huge genocide and persecution going on in Xinjiang.
Mm.
Sorry, I cut you there, but I think
no, it's okay. No, Matthew,
can,
I know you wanted to say something. I know I wanted to make sure that.
No,
I know
that's
we're
good.
talking a little bit.
No, knowing that Xinjiang is not far away from that, from the Gilgit-Baltistan region. I wanted that exact commentary from Senge on the Uyghur situation, knowing it's a regional thing. I mean, it's a lot of land over there, but you guys are as close as anybody.
In 1949, when Mao he started his communist revolution, he occupied a lot of valleys that belonged to Gilgit-Baltistan, like important, staging posts, trade posts like Daftar, for instance, belonged to Gilgit, the Raja of Hunza. Now it's in Xinjiang. Mintaka Valley, for instance, Bayak Pass that connected us directly with Tajikistan is now in Xinjiang, occupied by China. And then 1963, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, under General Ayub Khan, who was the field marshal at that time and the president of the country, he signed land agreements with China, gave away Shaskam and Raskam and Shimshal and some other valleys that belong to Tagdumbash, for instance, belong to Gilgit-Baltistan. They all become part of Yarkand and Kashgar prefectures right now. We share ethnicity with them. A lot of Tajiks who live in Tashkurgan in Xinjiang, for instance, they have relatives in Hunza and in the Khizr district of Gilgit-Baltistan. And they also have relatives in Badakhshan, Afghanistan's Badakhshan. 2 districts of Gilgit share immediate border with Afghanistan. So all these people, persecuted people, when Mao attacked, a lot of these Uyghurs and the Tajiks, they fled and they came and took refuge in Gilgit. And, we are really concerned about the way China is treating identity of Uyghurs. Because the reason why we are concerned is because China is doing a lot of economic development in Gilgit-Baltistan. They're spending about $40 to $50 billion there, building huge dams like Diamir Dam, Bonji Dam, and Skardu Dam, bunch of other dams. And we believe that they will eventually occupy Gilgit, annex it to Xinjiang, and make us, a guinea pig, an experiment, the way they're experimenting their own economic and social models on the people of Xinjiang. on the Kazakh and the Uyghurs and the Tajiks there. They will do the same with us, and they will try to oppress our religious and cultural identity, our connection with, Tibet, for instance, as John mentioned.
One
And this is,
China concept, right?
yeah, one China concept, assimilation, right?
Yes.
There's one identity, one nationalism, one patriotism, and anything else is treason.
Yeah.
So this is something that we are really concerned about, because what Pakistan has done is given the entire telecom industry of Gilgit in the hands of the Chinese.
Goodness gracious.
From an intelligence standpoint, that's a huge problem for the United States.
Yes.
We're talking about all the telecommunications exchanges, every bit of information, every bit of communication, every bit of data goes through the Chinese intelligence service,
Exactly.
which, as a crossroads of the world, that affects us.
Yeah.
And a lot of my Baloch friend, Balochistan is a province, it's in Pakistani occupation on the Persian Arabian Gulf in the Indian Ocean. They will tell you that when Pakistanis torture and interrogate the Baloch activists who they capture, many of them present in the room are the Chinese. So Chinese are helping Pakistan learn all the ropes, how to interrogate the way they do, with Tibetans and the Uyghurs, or maybe the, Mongolians and the Manchus and the people in Zhuang area. So I think this is really concerned that Pakistan has given up its sovereignty and allowed China to literally take over. And China, without firing a bullet, has been able to reach the warm waters of Indian Ocean.
Yeah, the port, right?
Exactly, and it has a port there, as a naval port there in Ormara. Now they're building another port in Basni and in Sonmiani, and another port in Karachi. They're like expanding very fast, and now they're trying to rope in Iran into it, and trying to throw India and United States out of that equation. So I think this is a concern that not only United States, Secretary Pompeo's talk about all the time, but local people, they see that as an attack on their resources, on their identities. Balochistan is rich in gold and uranium. Gilgit is rich in gold and uranium. We have huge copper, deposits. And I think it is Chinese in the end that will be able to, with the help of Pakistanis and Iranians, will be able to, form this nexus. And minorities like Baloch or Hazaras or, smaller groups within Afghan, ethnic composition and Sindhis, they will be affected adversely in that equation.
So, Senge, as we near wrapping this up, what are one or two policy recommendations you'd like to see the U.S. or the broader Western allies implement?
I think, if you remember Chernobyl, right, that kind of turned the whole thing against the Soviets. It was like a milestone where, and I could bring a little bit of comparison with that, with this Wuhan virus. Wuhan virus has exposed China in so many ways, and it has, exposed the vulnerabilities that it is trying to spread across, using and abusing countries, and attacking their democracies. I want to give an example of Nepal, for instance, right? Now, Nepal is a dictatorship. It's a communist regime, but few decades back, it was trying to be a democracy. So what China does, they, whatever they can do to first they partner with other countries to exploit the resources, then eventually they attack their, civilian institutions, their democratic institutions, and convert them into communist, dictatorships. What I think the West need to do at this point, I believe, and I think this idea came because yesterday I was reading this thing about Australia, and China's threatening Australia with huge economic disadvantages if Australia tries to go against China's strategic interests in the area. So I think countries like France and the United States and Canada and other countries from G7, India, they need to, Japan, we need to come together and have some kind of this cushion, this some kind of a safety net that these smaller countries could fall back on in case they decide to abandon China. And should be able to fill that vacuum. We should not wait till an economic collapse happens in those countries. Otherwise, they will remain hostage to China.
It's happening all throughout Africa,
Exactly.
And then you get these high interest loans
exactly
to build the infrastructure for the Chinese to take the minerals back to China. But there's all these strange high interest loans that they're doing, and so they're indentured essentially to China, even if they decide to move in a different direction because of these loans, right?
So we should work, and try to be on the same page when it comes to how to mitigate problems that will arise after many countries have realized that Chinese economic model, political model is not a good model. Right. It does not contribute to the well-being of local people. It thrives on, it feeds on the miseries of the local people, right? So I think, partnering with India and Vietnam and other countries like, France and England, and trying to come up with this model where we could, provide some kind of safety net to the countries that want to challenge China. I think that is something that needs to be done. The understanding of the issue of Gilgit and Kashmir in the United States come from the time of the Cold War, when India tried to, stay non-aligned, or sometimes, it had soft corner for the Soviets. So I think we need to unlearn and relearn about Kashmir and India. That's what I think. There's a lot of, when I talk to John and other people in the United States, when we talk about issues, there's a lot of, de-learning, unlearning, and relearning that need to be done in the greater interest of the local people, as well as, the partnerships that we are trying to seek in Asia and, in the Eastern Hemisphere. And I think it's in the interest of the United States to have a little bit, deeper understanding of the constitutional relationship that Kashmir has with India. Because if you look at me, I come from a region which has been in Pakistani occupation for 70 years, and we never had a constitutional setup to govern our land. We are still a colony, like a person, one person rule from Islamabad.
Yeah, it's like a viceroy.
It's a viceroy.
He can make any decisions he wants, right?
Who's not elected by local people, who comes from a Pashtun or a Punjabi ethnicity. He lives in Pakistan. He never, comes to Gilgit-Baltistan, but he has absolute control over Gilgit-Baltistan's economic, religious decisions and all that. For instance, all these, one of the local politicians said, now that person is called the Minister for Mining, and he said every single lease that Pakistan has signed with other countries in Gilgit have been signed in Islamabad without my information, right? Now that person has said that on record. There's another person who is called the Deputy Speaker of the Gilgit Assembly. This assembly does not have legislative powers. This is just like, a whitewash to show the international community that we have some powers. That person says every valuable mountain and mountain peak that Gilgit has been leased out, right? So I think we need to understand that when it comes to constitutional relationship with Pakistan and India, we have a legal connection with India, and our relationship with Central Asia, Xinjiang, Tibet, these need to come in the forward, in the front, for the Americans to understand the importance of Gilgit-Baltistan. So I think we need to move away from, what happened during the Cold War, how India aligned itself and how United States aligned itself with Pakistan. I mean, you were talking about Musharraf, Musharraf was not against terrorism. I think this is a big myth that the Americans, probably still believe. He wanted to rearrange the concept of terrorism and try to sell it to the Americans. And he said, look, we will not attack Afghans, but we will continue to attack Kashmir. And we will try to shift all those terrorists in Afghanistan towards the Indian border.
This is a conversation I have on the Hill, where I've members in the House and the Senate saying to me, well, Musharraf was, pro-America and he was against terrorism. And And I'm sitting there going, well, I know he attacked the Red Mosque. I know that. But I'm pretty sure he was exporting some terrorism along the northern territories.
Yeah.
And then we were still fiddling around with Afghanistan, but Afghanistan was Taliban controlled. And so Pakistan didn't have to worry about anything.
And now it's going to fall back into their lap if we refuse to see our relationship with countries like India and from this contemporary portfolio, which is India is developing as an ally of the United States and China. During the time of Kissinger, we looked at China from different angle, but now we look at China from different angle, right? So I think all the countries, they're changing their roles and they're changing their camps, and I think it will be beneficial for the people of the United States to relearn things about Kashmir, which could also help the United States itself.
That's a great coverage of the landscape, Senge. We appreciate those insights.
Thanks, man.
And really underscores the fact that, I think John would probably agree that when the U.S. and Western powers withdraw, particularly in this era of rekindled nationalism, that those vacuums will be filled. Those vacuums of relationships and diplomatic relationships and ties between nations. And in this region in particular, that vacuum is going to be filled by China and is being filled by China as the West withdraws. And that's going to be a problem for a long time to come. Senge and John, thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
As we can be of assistance at Crossing Phase, please let us know. Senge, thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate your visit on Crossing Phase.
Thank you, man. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
This has been Crossing Phase with John Pinna and Matt Hawkins, a podcast of Roll Top Productions and Muslims for Muslims. Crossing Phase is available on all your favorite podcast outlets, including Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Overcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, TuneIn, and now, as of today, with Senge, we're on YouTube. We appreciate your review of our program, especially in the Apple Store. Let us know what you think of the show via Twitter at MTHawk, at JTPinna, and at Crossing Phase. Show notes and more are available at crossingphase.com. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Have a great afternoon. Stay safe.
Likewise.